Hello friends! Today I'm excited to show you a software-only solution that lets you boost performance of your Macintosh LC475, Quadra 605, LC575, and the Performa variants. Sitting next to me is my Color Classic Mystic, which uses an LC575 motherboard, and that's the machine I'm going to be showing you today. So, let's get started. The software is introduced on the blog site of a gentleman named Phipli, and originally consisted of a control panel and extension named Soft 475 Overclock, because it was originally an LC475 computer that the software was intended to overclock. Later, Phipli created a convenient control strip module, which he named Control Strip 475 Overclock, and all of this software can be freely downloaded from his blog site. Phipli also gives us some development history by saying that 68K forum member Musterman kickstarted the whole project back in July 2024. And in the months that followed, forum members Zigzag Joe, Cheese Straws, Arby, Bowl, and Mr. Fahrenheit all contributed to the effort, which enabled Phipli to put together the software I'm telling you about today. Before going further, it's important that your machine be fully recapped and is in stable working condition. But you should recap your Mac anyway, even if you're not going to use this software. Also be sure to remove any hardware overclockers that you might have installed. My Color Classic Mystic is fully recapped, both the analog board and the motherboard, and is in very stable working condition. I also removed K-Koba's Spicio Clock hardware overclocker that I had installed previously. So my Mac is good to go. If you have one of the pizza box machines like the LC475, Phipli says you can't use the 475 overclock software if you've replaced the speed settings resistors on your logic board with blobs of solder. He also optionally recommends moving the 0 ohm resistor from R96 to R95 pads. If you have a Performa 577 or LC575 like my motherboard, you don't have to worry about solder blobs or resistors. But to reach the highest overclocks with any of the compatible Macs, you absolutely need to have 60 nanosecond VRAM and a 6840 CPU that's highly overclockable, which varies by the mask version, but also a CPU that has an FPU. And then you'll want to put a heatsink on it, and preferably a fan as well, such as a 40mm Noctua. And I've done all that, and I'm able to reach some of the highest clock speeds. But even if you don't do what I've done, you'll still be able to use the software to overclock. It's just that you may be limited to 40 megahertz or less. Phipli strongly suggests that you download and exclusively use his Control Strip module version of the software because it contains his latest changes, and it's very easy to use too. It works with both 32-bit addressing and 24-bit addressing, and it has separate optimized timings for the LC575 and 475 to account for the differences in motherboard memory speeds. It's also very user-friendly because it won't overclock your machine when you boot. In other words, you can't overclock too high with the control strip and then discover you can't boot. It's largely a hassle-free way to overclock. If you use System 7.1, you probably don't already have Apple's control strip software installed. Without it, you can't use the 475 overclock control strip. You'll find a link to this Macintosh Garden page in the video description. With that said, Phipli's website also lets you download the control panel and extension version of the software, and I actually spent many weeks testing that version long before I touched the control strip. So to be thorough in this video, I will give you an overview of that software too a bit later. But I wish to emphasize that you technically don't need the extension and control panel if you're using the control strip, and Phipli really wants you to use the control strip instead. Now once you get the Control Strip 475 Overclock software onto your vintage Mac or into an emulator of your choice like Basilisk 2, which is what you're seeing me use right now, you'll need to use Stuffit Expander to decode the archive, and note that I'm using Expander version 5.5, and then make sure that you decompress the SIT file. And now we will open the folder here, and be sure to go through the README. And then you'll want to manually drag this CS475OC control strip module into your System Folders Control Strip Module folder. Now, if you do not see this control strip modules folder, it could be that you need to install Apple's control strip software into your control panels folder and then make sure that it's set up correctly. For example, you want to make sure that it says show control strip here, and you may need to restart for it to take effect, but then it will show down there. And then you need to restart. And once installed, you just need to click on the control strip, and it says 475, and there are various clock choices, clock speed choices that you have here. Now just keep in mind that if you don't have high-speed 60 nanosecond VRAM and a very overclockable 68040 CPU, choosing something like 45 or 50 megahertz may cause your machine to lock up. But the good news is that you only need to restart because the control strip overclock only lasts until you restart. And that means that your Mac will be set to its factory clock speed when you boot or reboot, and the control strip lets you overclock at your leisure, such as when you want to decompress a file, play a game, or whenever you otherwise want more speed. To verify that your chosen clock speed settings are working, make sure you download Clockometer from Macintosh Garden. I'm now booting my Mystic with only Phipli's control strip installed, which means my LC575 motherboard is running at its stock clock speed of 33 megahertz. And we can see that the OS is System 7.1, and we can confirm the clock frequency using a little app called Clockometer. And yep, there it is, 33 megahertz. Now remember, this is the stock speed. I haven't overclocked anything yet because I haven't touched the control strip yet. But if I click the control strip and downclock, that's right, you can downclock to 25 or 20 megahertz. I'm going to downclock to 25. Then we use Clockometer again. There it is, 25 megahertz. Great. All right, let's leave Clockometer open, but let's try a different clock speed. Let's try 40 megahertz this time. And then we have to click the recalculate button. And there it is, 40 megahertz. Let's go all the way up to 50 megahertz and recalculate. And well, there was a little font anomaly there, but yep, there it is, 50 megahertz. And that's because my overclockable motherboard, fast VRAM, and all the bells and whistles can accommodate that. You may not able to reach all of the high speeds that Clockometer offers, and even if you have a board like mine, you can see that the fonts get messed up, right? If we go back to the you can see the fonts are highly unusual now. But what we need to do is basically just downclock. We'll go to 45 megahertz, and then I can quit and see the fonts are normal again. There. You just basically have to choose the right clock speed and refresh, and then you'll be okay. Now, I did install the app called Wish I Were to pretend to be a 475, and then I tried it again at 50 megahertz, and I did not find the fonts getting messed up, and I think that's because Wish I Were making this machine pretend to be 475. It fakes out the control strip to think it's a 475, so it uses 475 timings, which for some reason, for my machine anyway, it makes it more stable at 50 megahertz. So I just wanted to mention that. You can play around with Wish I Were and have an impact on how the control strip functions. Well, now let's see how overclocking has an impact on gaming. What I'm going to do is downclock to 25 megahertz, and we're going to just once again confirm, yes, I'm at 25 megahertz. And then I'm going to launch Dark Forces. Take a look how small this is. Microscopic, almost icon-sized. And these teensy tiny text, you can barely read it. And see how wide that Star Wars logo was? It doesn't fill the whole screen. See how small it is? So 25 megahertz is really too slow to get the most out of this game. So I'm going to quit out of here. And by the way, 25 megahertz is the base clock speed of the LC475. So now I'm going to boost the clock speed to 33 megahertz. It's just a very modest boost in the speed. And again, I can prove that to you with Clockometer. It's now 33 megahertz. And then I'm going to launch the game again. And let's see what happens this time. Ready? Hey, that's much better, that size, right? Much bigger than before. Boom. Actual readable text. Imagine that. And lovely graphics animation that fills the full screen. So even with that very modest increase in clock speed, we now have a significantly better experience with full screen graphics. Okay, now let's try a more demanding game. I've got Doom 2 here, and I'm going to leave the clock speed at 33 megahertz, which again for my motherboard is its stock speed. Launch the game. And remember, my screen is 640 by 480 VGA resolution. Okay, we've got turbo off. And then to verify the options, my screen size is max, which is what I want to show you. It's going to be the most demanding. And normally if you have it just one tick below max, it'll have a little bar at the bottom. But I have it set on max, so let's go ahead and start a new game. Okay. So if I pan around, I am pushing the right arrow, pushing and holding. Now I'm going to push and hold the left arrow. It's not a slideshow, you know, it's not that bad, but unfortunately this game doesn't allow, I mean the Mac version of this game doesn't allow me to show the FPS, the frame rate. So I don't really know how much it is, but it's pretty sluggish. So let me now switch that to, probably have to go to the Finder to do it, 50 megahertz. Okay. All right, and so now I'm going to push and hold the right arrow. Faster, right? Left arrow. Yeah. So you can feel the speed. It's not PowerPC level smooth, but it's smoother than it was at 33. So let me go back to 33, and we'll do a little actual gameplay. Okay, so we're back to Mr. Slow again. So let's give this a try. I line this guy and get him first. Now I'm pretty decent at this game, but I don't like playing it at 33 megahertz. See how it takes a long time to pan around? Yeah. You're going to get shot more. You're not going to be able to shoot as fast. Everything is just slow like molasses, right? Okay, so now let me switch back to 50 megahertz. And then we'll try it again. New game. Alright, here we go. Alright. It's, again, not like what you're going to get on a PowerPC, but still, everything is a bit more fluid, and I can spin around more. It doesn't antagonize me as much. And even though you've got multiple bad guys, right, you're still able to handle it at this clock speed. So it really makes a difference. But again, this board that I have in here is highly overclockable. And yours might not be able to reach this level of performance, so please just keep that in mind. Even though Phipli strongly discourages its use and really doesn't want me to tell you about it at all, I'll now give you an overview of his control panel and extension software because, in my opinion, there are technically some use cases for it. You need to use Stuff It Expander to remove the encoding, and then double-click the installer. Click Continue, be sure to read through the README, then click Continue, click anywhere here, and then make absolutely sure that you choose Custom Install to avoid installing the old version control strip. Click on Install Extension / Control Panel Only, then choose which drive you want to install onto, then click Install, and then click Quit. Now confirm that your installation succeeded by opening the System folder, Control Panels folder, and confirm that Soft 475 OC Setup is there. Then you want to open the Extensions folder and make sure that Soft 475 Overclock is there. Now, here are 3 reasons why I like the control panel and extension version for me and my use case. Number 1, you can set clock speeds that the control strip doesn't offer, which is nice for testing in my opinion. And to do that, you just open up the control panel here, and what you want to do is choose Custom. Bypass the scary warning message here. And then you can type a speed. And then after you type it, you click the Calc button. And lastly, click Set to save your changes. Very easy. The second reason I like the control panel and extension is because when you reboot, your changes are saved, and when the extension loads, your machine is overclocked, which will make booting faster. The third reason I like it is because, in my case anyway, I found that tweaking the advanced settings really make a difference and can potentially turbocharge your performance. For example, after I set to 47 megahertz, when you open advanced, all of these fields are filled out with optimized settings for that particular clock speed. Now, I, after much testing, would recommend against touching NI, MI, or P. Just leave those what they are. But in my experimentation, I found that when I reduce the min and the max to be 1, performance on my machine really goes through the roof, and I will show you benchmarks in a few moments. Now, I've tested the control panel and extension for many hours and found that the highest clock speed I can use to boot into System 7.6.1 and OS 8.1 is 47 megahertz. I can use 48, 49, or even 50 megahertz to boot into System 7.1 or 7.5.5, but for whatever reason, 7.6.1 and OS 8.1 don't like frequencies higher than 47. However, if I have 47 megahertz or lower set, and then successfully boot into 7.6.1, I can then use the control strip to overclock it to 50 megahertz, and for whatever reason that works. One important thing to note is that the benefit to using the control panel and the extension can also be the detriment, insofar as when it's booting and the extension loads, from that point forward, you'll be running at an overclocked higher clock speed and your machine will be accelerated, which can reduce your boot times. However, if you had previously set a clock speed that's too high, when you then restart and try to boot, when the extension loads, your machine will either freeze or show a black screen. So what I'm doing right now is restarting, and I have the control panel set to 49 megahertz, which I know is too high, and it's going to freeze. And we can see that right now in the boot sequence. So if I have a look, sure enough, the icon there is showing that just as the 475 overclock extension loaded, it overclocked and 7.6.1 won't boot. So if you do the same, there is a solution, and that is you take your power switch. So on this Color Classic Mystic, it's over here on this side in the back, and you have to switch off the power. And then what you need to do is leave it off for at least 20 seconds, 30 seconds or so that all the capacitors drain out, all of the voltage, it goes down from the memory, and all the chips basically get reset. And then you can power on and push your power button to start up the computer, and then you're going to hold down the shift key, because that's going to prevent the extensions from loading. And then you would boot, and then go back into your control panel, try a lower clock speed, and then restart and see if that works. So that's one thing that you can do. Also, the control panel and the control strip, they work fine together, and I've tested that quite a lot. What you can do is, as I said, you can boot with the control panel set to a frequency that's going to work and allow you to boot. But then after it's booted, you can use the control strip. And once you start using the control strip, then everything is going to be handed over to the control strip. It overrides any settings that you may have had set by the control panel until you restart. And then when you restart, the extension will load, and then the control panel will take over the overclocking again. I am going to power on now, and then I'm going to push the power button, and now I'm going to hold down the shift key. And so while I'm talking, you should be able to see that the machine will boot this time. And honestly, I just want to say that I've spent a lot of time with the control panel and testing even the advanced settings with min and max set to 1, and I've not had any problem. I spoke to Musterman, the gentleman who kick-started this entire project, and he told me that when you change the min and max settings to be lower than what they are originally set to be based on your clock frequency, then what that does is it reduces the number of wait states, and that particularly affects the ROM more than anything else, and it potentially will give you better performance, assuming that you've chosen a clock speed that's a reasonable value. But it's also possible that your machine's going to lock up too. But basically, for my use case, I haven't had any problems with it. That's not a guarantee. Your experience would be problem-free, and so your mileage would vary, of course. And you always need to keep in mind that I'm using a 575 board and not a 475 board. So again, as with anything when you're overclocking, you do it at your own risk. And to mitigate that risk, Phipli suggests very strongly that you use the control strip instead. He doesn't even recommend using both. He says just use the control strip and you ought to be fine. And honestly, in my opinion, if you don't need any granular ability to adjust any clock speed you want, for example, if you're satisfied with 25 megahertz, 33 megahertz, 40, 45, and 50, and only those choices, which the control strip offers, meaning you won't be able to choose 47 megahertz or 49. If you're happy with that, and if you don't need to adjust the advanced settings, then, going with the control strip, as Phipli says, is really the best way to go, and it's kind of worry-free. Yeah, you may not be able to overclock with the control strips to some of the highest frequencies, but again, it's not going to prevent you from booting like overclocking with the control panel potentially would. So there's just that to think about. Also, I need to emphasize to you that this software is completely free. Phipli has put a lot of hours into this, and of course Musterman, who kickstarted everything, did too. But Phipli, he spent not only hours writing the software, but he also wrote the documentation. And I think based on that, it would be a bad idea to send him complaints or a long list of questions, because if you are unable to use the software based on his documentation and based on what you're saying in this video, then probably this software really isn't for you. And it's 100% optional to install it, folks. And then you might say, well, why are you giving us this video, and all of that? And my answer to that question is, I've had a great experience with it. not only with the control strip, but the control panel and the extension too. And so my thinking is that by showing you this video, some of you may wish to try it. And it just could be that you'll have the same success that I did and enjoy it just as much as I do. Now let's take a look at some benchmark results, starting with MacBench 3.0. I spent many hours running and rerunning tests, so I can tell you these numbers are highly repeatable and give you a good idea of what to expect, especially if you have an LC575 motherboard like mine that's been recapped and upgraded. Now the top two tests over here were run with the motherboard in the stock condition mounted inside my Color Classic before I did the VGA mod, which is why the resolution is lower than 640 by 480 VGA. These two were tested without the Spicio clock and without 475 overclock, simply running at the base clock speed of 33 megahertz. Both of those used my spinning platter drive, which is a Quantum XP34550S, which is a pretty speedy drive. Now below that you see all of the names are SW0CCS, which stands for 475 overclock using the control strip. Those four machine configurations are the same except for the drive. Even so, you can see that the 475 overclock scores for processor are 9% higher than stock, which is nice. And looking at floating point, we can see, boy, what a difference the FPU makes inside your 68040 relative to the LC575, which doesn't have an FPU. Jumping to the bottom, we see that 475 overclock gives you a nice boost to both of the graphics scores relative to the stock machine. Then if we examine the disk mix, things get a bit more interesting. My Blue SCSI version 1 is overclocked to 128 megahertz, and it yields better scores than the theoretically faster Blue SCSI version 2. Go figure. However, the winner by far is Mac SD from YMK Devices. It's important to note that disk mix shows you drive performance based on the usage of business apps like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, ClarisWorks, and FileMaker Pro, reading and writing small blocks of data. Below that we see the publishing disk mix, which shows you drive performance based on the usage of Photoshop and Quark Express, which is a page layout program like PageMaker, reading and writing large blocks of data. And in that test, my Quantum hard drive comes out on top, although Blue SCSI version 2 is not far behind. I then reran the tests at 40 megahertz, this time with the top two results using Spicio clock, and both having the stock CPU, which does not have an FPU. That's what the LC means here. Actually means low cost, but low cost because it doesn't have an FPU. And the top result has a lower resolution because that was before I did the VGA mod, 512 by 384. Interestingly, if we scroll down to the graphics scores, the VGA mod gets slightly better performance despite being a higher resolution. The disk scores show the same winners as before, with Mac SD at the top for disk mix, and the Quantum hard drive and Blue SCSI version 2 taking the crown for the publishing disk mix. I then reran the tests at even higher overclocks, but this time I did not use the control strip and instead used the control panel and extension with advanced settings, min and max, set to 1. So that's what this means. SW0CA is software overclock advanced settings here. And you can see the turbocharging effect here, because even though the clock speed is set to 47 megahertz, it performs pretty much as well as Spicio clock set to 50.7 megahertz. Have a look. However, I barely was able to do this test with Spicy. It's completely unstable at that high clock speed. However, when I use 475 overclock at 47 megahertz, and also use those advanced min and max tweaks, I can run it for many hours at a time, running pretty much any software I like without any instability whatsoever. Again, maybe that pertains only to my machine, I'm not too sure, but I've had success with it. And if we look at the disk scores, Pretty much the same winners as before. I also ran many tests using Norton System Info 3.5.3. The reference system in this case is the PowerMac 6160, given a score of 100, and all other results are relative to that. Note that Spicy Clock is ranked at second place, just under the PowerMac 6100. However, 51.6 megahertz was not a stable clock speed for me, and although I was able to complete the benchmark and save it, the machine crashed soon after that. Even so, it's a good reference point, so that's why I've included it. Down below we see SW0CA, and that means I use the control panel and extension with advanced settings, min and max set to 1. I also have another benchmark result. WIW475 means that I used Wish I Were software to pretend to be an LC475, which tricks the control strip into using less aggressive 475 timings. So I did that because my Mystic isn't perfectly stable at 50 megahertz with a control strip using the LC575 timings. But when I fake it out and use 475, it works pretty well. I also included other results like the Quadra 840 AV and my tricked out Mac 2 Ci with a Daystar Turbo 40 running at 40 megahertz and my Radius Thunder 24 GT video card. And scrolling down, we see dead last is the wicked fast Mac 2 FX with a fast hard drive, which compared to my 68040 Macs isn't very fast after all. Now if I scroll back up and show the CPU scores, the results aren't too surprising as the rankings are based on clock speed. And ditto for the FPU scores. And if you take a look, the FPU scores really show us how that PowerPC chip shines in the 6100 results. Now video scores are interesting because relative to the PowerMac 6100, my Mystic beats it for all clock speeds higher than 40 megahertz. And the disk scores show us a little taste of what we saw in MacBench 3 with MacSD taking the crown. But the surprising part is that MacSD wins even when my machine is clocked down to 33 megahertz. Wow. In second place is my Quantum hard drive, and we see that BlueSCSI version 1, this is overclocked to 128 megahertz, comes in after that, and then at the bottom here we have BlueSCSI version 2. Note that I put a link to all of these benchmarks for you in the video description below. Now it's time to consider some caveats to the software. There are several of them, and I made copious notes, so please forgive me if I happen to look down now and then. First and foremost, as I said before, you need to make sure that your machine is fully recapped, especially the motherboard, using OSCON if at all possible. You can use an LC version 040, but I strongly recommend one with an FPU, which means you're going to have to swap out the CPU and take some risks there, because some of them out there, especially the ones from China, are all fakes. So it can be a challenge to do that, but you can't clock the LC version quite as high, in my experience. The one with an FPU, for whatever reason, I could clock it higher. Now maybe it was the mask version of the chip and all that, but I'm not going to get into that in this video, but suffice it to say, you really do need to swap that out. And absolutely positively get yourself 60 nanosecond VRAM, links in the text description below, because without all of those upgrades, you're not going to be able to reach the highest clock speeds. I also want to mention that Phipli told me he was able to hit 50 megahertz on his LC475, in part because he changed out his clock driver chip that I'll be talking in a moment, but he basically optimized his machine as much as it could be optimized, and he was able to reach 50 megahertz, even though his motherboard was recapped with solid tantalum capacitors. In my experience with the LC575 motherboard anyway, I wasn't able to get 50 megahertz until I recapped with lower ESR OSCON, Panasonic OSCON capacitors. And not just me, but Kei Koba, my friend Kei Koba, who has multiple Color Classics and Mystics, told me that he wasn't able to reach 50 megahertz until he followed my pattern and removed all of his solid tantalum capacitors and installed low ESR Panasonic OSCON polymer capacitors. and they have about 20 milliohm or so ESR. And then he was able to reach it. So that's why I recommend, for new recapping projects anyway, I know a lot of people love to use tantalums, but a lot of those capacitors are like 700 milliohms. Polymer tantalum, I mean, have lower ESR, but still it's not as low as 20 milliohms. So I would suggest the polymer OSCON capacitors or similar, because that low ESR, I think it helps to feed the quick, whenever the CPU needs spiky amounts of current, right? There's short, brief times that it needs extra current, and the low ESR capacitors are able to supply it better than higher ESR capacitors. So just want to drive that point home. To get the best performance out of the software, you really need to consider the right way to recap and all of the upgrades I just mentioned. Now, point number 2. You will need Phipli's control strip version 1.0.4 in order to be compatible with 24-bit addressing mode. Now, most of you know 24-bit addressing because if you run System 6, it requires that. You can't turn on 32-bit addressing. Well, there's some software out there that can potentially allow you to do that, but from Apple, no. You had to use 24-bit addressing. That limits you to 8 megabytes of RAM. And the control strip is compatible with that. Now, System 6 doesn't matter because even for the 475 machine, you can't boot System 6. For this Mystic, I can't boot System 6. But if you install the Apple IIe card, which I actually have in my Mystic, and I guess you can install it in the 475 too. I don't have a 475, but it seems like for most of the LC models, you could add such a card. You have to turn on, or no, you have to turn off 32-bit addressing, which means it turns on 24-bit addressing in order to use that Apple IIe card. And the good news is that if you use his control strip version 1.0.4 or higher, it's compatible, which means you can overclock. Even in 24-bit addressing mode. But if you use the control panel and extension version of 475 Overclock, it's not compatible with 24-bit addressing. It won't cause any problems, it will shut down, meaning you won't be able to overclock with the control panel and extension, so you'll have to use the control strip. Caveat number 3 is that this is something I read and can't test myself, but you will need to set your resolution before you overclock with this software. That doesn't apply to my machine because I did the VGA mod and it's fixed 640 by 480 resolution and I cannot change to any other resolution, so it doesn't matter. But for other machines which allow you to change resolutions, you should change your resolution first and then overclock. Next is point number 4. It pertains to the clock driver chip. On the LC575, your board probably has the MC88920 clock driver chip, and many people have reported using the software that they are unable to reach beyond 40 megahertz with that particular chip in there, and people who have removed it and put on a better grade chip have been able to go to higher clock speeds. Now on my machine, I don't have that chip. Mine is an LC575 board, and my chip part number is MC88916DW55, which is actually the lowest grade chip in that family of chips. Might be better spec than the 88920, but still, back when I had Spicio clock installed, I was able to go to 50 megahertz and beyond. Those clock frequencies weren't stable, but I had, for a brief time, I was able to run some benchmarks at like 51.6 megahertz, and I was able to run 50 megahertz for quite some time before it exhibited problems. And I was able to do all of that with that DW55 clock driver chip in there. But unfortunately, one day I was taking voltage measurements of that chip. I didn't short circuit anything, but for some reason, when you take voltage measurements on that DW55 chip, it doesn't like it. It fried. And I was really shocked because I've never fried anything just by taking voltage measurements before. But yeah, it fried. But thankfully, my friend Jeff Walther came forward and sold me a DW80 chip. And so what I did is I used my hot air gun to remove the old dead DW55 chip, and I soldered in a DW80. So everything you've seen in this video was done with that DW80 chip. I don't think it matters. I think you could probably get away with using the DW55, but I can't say because I had already swapped out the chip for the DW80 when I began testing this software. Okay, number 5, serial ports. If you go beyond 44 megahertz in your overclock, your serial ports won't work. For me, it doesn't really matter because I don't use them. But if you use any kind of serial devices or printers, then it will matter. And if you use the control strip, it's not a big deal. The control strip doesn't give you a lot of granular flexibility when it comes to clock speeds. I mean, you go from 40 to 45. There's no way you can go to 44, right? So that's also why I kind of like the control panel, because it gives me a little bit more flexibility to choose the clock speeds I want. But yeah, just use the control strip and just downclock to 40 megahertz. I mean, I've read many people who are excited to even get to 40 megahertz, you know, over their base clock speeds of either 25 megahertz or 33. So it's not too huge of a loss. Whenever you need to use to print or do something like that, just downclock and you'll be fine. Next is you may not be able to boot 7.6.1 and OS 8.1 if you use any clock speed above 47 megahertz, at least on the Mystic 575 motherboard. I can't speak about the 475, but those of you who have upgraded your Mystics with the K-Koba, right? You put that K-Koba Spicio clock on there, you probably already figured that out. I can boot System 7.1 or 7.5.5 even at 50 megahertz and beyond. But for whatever reason, 7.6.1 and OS 8.1, they don't like anything much higher than 47 megahertz. So that's just something to remember. And that's why when I use the control panel extension, I leave it set to 47 megahertz so I don't forget and say, oh, oops, I'm booting in 7.6.1 now, and I don't want it to lock up. So I just use 47 megahertz, and that way I can boot any OS I want. Next is floppy drives, not floppy drives, but 1.44 megabyte floppy disks. In my testing, stop working at clock speeds above about 49.1 megahertz. I guess it's just, you know, the clock speed is too high, or maybe it's wait states, because what I can say is that when I use the control strip, whether I use the control panel and extension or the control strip on my 575 board, at 50 megahertz, I can put in my disk and say format it, erase it, and it starts the process of erasing, but then it gives me some weird sounds, and then ultimately it will error out. But if I downclock to 49.1 megahertz or below, I don't have any problem. But here's the other thing. I can use Wish I Were software to make my machine pretend to be an LC475, and then I can use Phipli's control strip to overclock to 50 megahertz, and then no problem. So he said that the timings are different when it detects what machine you have, and that pertains to wait states and other things, I believe. But if you want to run it at 50 megahertz and still use your 1.44 megabyte disks, you just need to use Wish I Were software, pretend to be an LC475. And if you already have an LC475, you don't need to use Wish I Were. But it's just something to note in regards to how fast the clock speed is versus whether you want to use... The floppy drive will work, folks. I can use 800K disks and 400K disks just fine for whatever reason. It only seems to affect 1.44 megabyte floppies, so just something to note. If you already use K-Koba's excellent Spicio clock overclocker, there's no real reason to change. I love the product. I used it for the past 3 years. It's a great product, and you know, there are some differences, of course, but if you've already got the product, there's not really a huge reason to change. However, I will say this. Even if you have one of the special back panels that allows you to mount Spicio clock so its potentiometer is facing outward, which means you don't have to pull the motherboard out in order to change the clock speed, still it's on the back. Whereas this software is on the front, always in front of your face. You can quickly and easily change the clock speed at the click of a mouse. And that is a huge fundamental difference. So some people may prefer it over spicy for that reason alone. There are other issues too, such as the precision. When you adjust spicy, you're turning a potentiometer, and you're not. There's not a real. I mean, maybe there's a reason you want to choose like 49.1 megahertz, but if you are that type of person, then it takes a little bit more effort to twist it to the correct speed, and you don't always know what speed you're getting until you actually check with Clockometer. But with this software, it's precise. You can be assured if you choose the control strip 45 megahertz, you're pretty much spot on. So that's another big benefit. The other thing is drift. Spicy Overclock uses a potentiometer that has plus minus 10% tolerance, and I found that it can drift. And so if you overclock right at the bleeding edge, you're not supposed to do it, but you know, I have done that before at the bleeding edge of what's possible on the maximum side of the clock speed. If it drifts in the upward direction, you might find you're not able to boot with spicy. For this software, I found that it almost doesn't drift at all. At least I haven't found any noticeable drift. And also, if you use only the control strip like Phipli wants you to do, then it won't overclock your boot sequence, so it won't matter, really. But yeah, it doesn't drift as much. So those are important considerations. If you're thinking about buying spicy, if you already have one, is the software for you? Those are things to think about. When it comes to cost versus performance, 475 Overclock can't be beat. And that's because the software is completely free. So if you have the time or desire, I strongly suggest you give it a try. Because folks, this is what this hobby is all about. Having fun with your vintage machines. Trying something new. Yes, there's the standard disclaimer, you do it at your own risk. I personally don't think the risk is too high, but hey, I can't guarantee everybody's situation and your machine and all that. And of course, neither can Phipli. And he also wants me to really push you towards the control strip and not the control panel and extension, although I'm a rebel and I use all of them, and I'm happy to do it. But if you want to be safe, you know, stick with the control strip, and you should be okay. But check out the text description below, because I put links to the downloads, and also for resources like the original threads where this information was discussed. Whenever you watch any of my videos, always check the text description. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Phipli for having created this software in the first place, but also for his time in having a long dialogue with me, answering my many questions by private message. He was very helpful, and he really spent a lot of time testing and refining this software, and he's really quite amazing. Also, I wish to thank Musterman, because he and I shared some PMs together, and he answered my many questions too. He gave me a lot of technical details, some of which I could understand, and he's the guy who kickstarted it all. He wrote the underlying code. Yes, there were other members who joined in the original discussion thread to bring us the software. So I wish to say a huge thank you to all of you gentlemen. You've made the hobby much better as a result. Thanks. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Please also subscribe and click the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of my future videos. Speaking of which, my next video will be about SP2SD version 2 from Koba of Karo's Mac Mods. I will be installing this on my Apple IIc. You can install it on other Apple II products as well. I also have some 3D printed cases coming from JLC PCB, which are still on order right now, that I'll be showing you as well. Thank you for watching today, folks, and I wish all of you a fabulous week.